I think what companies who are obsessed with owning historical IP, like intellectual property of dead authors, don't understand is that you can buy the characters and the concept, but you can't buy the writing. Right, just got back from the shops. And I'm stressed. I'm not stressed because I wasn't able to find what I went out looking for, which was thread to match these trousers so I can take them up. That was achieved. However, on my way to paradise, I fell into hell. I was innocently browsing the shelves of W.H. Smith, as one does on a sleepy Saturday in the Midlands, and what did I come across? But this! What's that, I hear you ask? The Twits Next Door. I'm way ahead of you. You're thinking, Roald Dahl's dead? How's he written a new book? He hasn't. Greg James and Chris Smith have written a new book. Cries in artist and socialism. So let's see what the capitalist hellscape has for us today, shall we? When a removal van arrives next door to the Twits and Mr. and Mrs. Lovely get out, that's bad enough, but it gets worse. Their two lovely children, Rough and Tumble, have moved in next door, and the Twits hate children. Brackets, sorry if you are one, we don't hate you, just to be clear. Oh my god, the disclaimer's already begun, I can't handle it. Anyway, this was half price at £6.49, and I thought, you might be curious about this, but not actually want to go through the rigmarole of picking it up and working out what eighth dimension we're living in. So I thought I'd take the bullet and do it for you. Now, I have a lot of thoughts about this because it wasn't even a very long walk home, but apparently I'm already overthinking it. But as you might know, Roald Dahl is an incredibly successful historical author in the world of the UK. I don't know how big he is outside of the UK. You let me know. I think he's kind of big in the US, but in Europe, not so much. His legacy has been somewhat tarnished in recent years by the reintroduction of the discussion around some of his very controversial views, the likes of which I will not do justice here by just briefly mentioning, so I'm going to leave some links in the description. But safe to say, it stirred up a lot of discussions around profit, what do we do with somebody's legacy when they're not actually profiting from it because they're dead, separating the art from the artist, etc, etc. Now, I have discussed the whole separating the art from the artists and how do we deal with our love of something that has been made by somebody with questionable character in my video about Taylor Swift, which I will link up here, and in reference to the book Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma. What I'm interested in today is whether this book is a net positive or a net negative for us, the reading population, not the publishers or the Roald Dahl Story Company, who, fun fact, is now owned by Netflix, so has all of the creative control over all of Roald Dahl's work, or even the new authors that have been commissioned to write this book, who I imagine are not getting the cut that they would do if it was their original idea and it was their original book. Not for their benefit, for us, the legacy of literature and the people that inhabit it, because I do feel like, whether subconsciously or unconsciously, we live inside the stories we tell ourselves, are part of the histories and the legacies and the current thoughts that we're all spittering around each other that we like to call art. And I want to think carefully about whether this is net good or net bad. And it's probably going to be a mixture of both, because everything is. Nothing is ever thing good, thing bad. But I want to tell my initial thoughts before I start reading the book, which I intend to do this weekend, because I need to know. I need to know. So the pros, let's start with the pros, because there's less of them. I imagine the pros would be, if I was a parent and I had a really fond memory of Roald Dahl and I just felt like they were really important books for my kids to read, but I felt uncomfortable about having to explain some of the more intricacies of what's in some of the work, and maybe not how do you explain to a kid that their favourite book can be their favourite book, but their favourite author can't be their favourite author. You know what I mean? The idealism for kids is complicated. So then if I was a parent, maybe it would be better for me to buy a book like this, because I'd still get the hit of nostalgia passing it on to my kids, but it was written by people who I presumably are not tangled up in the weird thoughts that Roald Dahl had. Roald Dahl as a writer was incredibly accomplished and has a very unique voice. So being able to immerse yourself in that voice is something that I can imagine wanting for kids that I'd have in this fictional world where I'd have them. So I get that. And then I also guess that the production is way better than the original things. One of the negatives is that it is not illustrated by Quentin Blake, which I don't know if it was a conscious decision to try and separate the branding from the original works, or was just a Quentin Blake being like, don't fricking do this. Because Quentin Blake's still alive, fun fact. I thought he was dead. But he is not. He is live and kicking, and I'm so happy for him. What a precious, beautiful man. But maybe he was like, I'm not going to illustrate this. This is a monstrosity. So we don't know. But the production on this book is really cool. I've been really impressed just sitting down here looking at it. The inside has a beautiful kind of flip effect where it's the Twits living in their house and then the other neighbours who are really kind living in their house. I will say that the binding is missing not only a ribbon but also like that little bit of fabric at the bottom of the binding to keep it together, so I don't know how long these books are going to last. But that's just a picky production thing from me, who worked in publishing but admittedly not in the production department, so do I even know what I'm talking about? I don't know, but that was something unusual that I noticed, like where's the little fabric thing? So yeah, they're all the pros that I could think of. The cons, well, are we giving ourselves and parents an easy out to not have to talk about the hard parts of literature and legacy and stuff with kids, and we're just getting like the cheat sheet so they don't have to think about it? Are we giving companies an opportunity to cherry pick parts of somebody's legacy for profit? Are we taking resources away from new authors that would benefit from being uplifted in the way that Roald Dahl is, even though he's dead and we don't need to uplift him anymore? He's fine. And most concerningly for me, are we giving the Roald Dahl company / Netflix opportunity to stop Roald Dahl's work going into the public domain, which is something that Disney has been deferring for ages and ages, like stopping their work from going into the public domain. You can look into the Mickey Mouse Defense League and all of that shenanigans, but it's a whole thing. Personally, for me, I think that things don't go into the public domain fast enough. Once things start becoming part of culture, I do think that it's the responsible thing to let the audience and the public play with it and respond to it. And without it being in the public domain, that is very hard. And to have a discussion, especially around authors that have a complicated past, is really important for us to process a collective history of loving a piece of work. So the fact that it won't go into the public domain for ages anyway, the idea that it would delay that even longer, because the argument that these bits of IP, this intellectual property, are still in use would be a great argument, I can imagine, in court for the Roald Dahl Story Company to elongate their ownership of the work and stopping it being discussed and used and built upon by the general public, which I believe is how good art is made. And then the last possible con is maybe it's shit. Maybe it's not good. I really hope it's good because I'm about to spend some of my hard-earned weekend on it. But if it's not good, then we're just, one, cheating people out of their money. Two, we're putting young readers off reading at all, because I do think it's really integral what we put in the hands of kids, because it's very hard for them to separate a bad book from a bad hobby. And if they read a bad book that's not very well thoughtfully and intelligently done, recognizing their intelligence, they're just going to think, I don't like reading. And I don't like that, because it would be the opposite of what Roald Dahl's legacy has done, which is get loads of kids into reading, like it or not. With all of those reservations in mind, it's time, I think, to start reading. What to do. Feeling very conflicted, because on some level I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't hate this book. I thought it was pretty good. If I'd picked it up just as a regular children's book, either when I was a bookseller or when I worked in the book publishing industry, I would have been like, yeah, I think some kids will like this. It's all right. Yeah, like, go for it. But as part of the legacy of an existing author, one who has practiced his craft for a very long time, it was really disappointing. So it's very confusing, because there were parts of it that I really liked. Like, they added in this thing about how Mr. Twit likes to make his own newspaper out of all of the worst headlines and stick it together so he can read that on the toilet. I thought touches like that were really Dahlian and funny and great. And there were a few other examples like that. But overall, I feel like the tropes of Dahl weren't even properly considered or respected, and like the parts of it that make it intelligent and funny and like a classic, like things that kids love rather than just liking. For example, the insults for the twins. I was worried that they would clean up the insults for the twits, but I do think there's a way of doing that whilst also being clever and finding like equivalent puns and funny sounding things. So for example, in the original Twits, which is famously based on two people that really freaking hate each other, they call each other things like you grizzly old grunion, you rotten old turnip, you filthy old frumpet. And there's obviously like wordplay there, alliteration, like they're funny words to say. To my knowledge, they're not offensive. And the stuff that replaced it, I know it's some down, but I actually lost count after a while. You soggy pudding, you ant brain, you droopy dinosaur. Enough said. And maybe that follows on from another problem I had with it. It was that I felt like in a lot of, not just Dahl, but a lot of books from that era, and I think one of the reasons they're successful is because the authorial voice that's omnipresent and that's telling you the story is exciting to children because it's a confidant. It's somebody who's letting you in on a big secret and like telling you about it and whispering in your ear. The authorial voice in this sounded a lot like a teacher's voice. It was much more of a like, this is what we do, children, this is what we don't do, children. It's felt like a authority rather than something that sits alongside the child. So like I wrote down one example that really stuck out to me. Mr. Twit is making a lot of noise with some bins, is essentially what's going on. And the authorial voice says, now obviously this is not the normal way to take out the bins. We just need to point that out in case you're ever asked to help. We don't want a pile of angry letters from your families. What? What? Even if I was reading this at like 9, I'd be like, shut up. There was so much of that that's like, you know, like recognising that their authorial voice was a person who was also trying to teach you how to act, which is not, well, we can get into that, but not really the role of children's literature, and I don't think what actually endears a child to a book. It might endear a parent to a book, and of course you're selling to the parents, but that's a really fucking depressing and horrific way to go about thinking about children's literature. So that kind of stuff really did rub me up the wrong way. The final example being like, one of the things that I think is really good about the success of Roald Dahl's writing is he's so inventive about the things that he puts in the books. Like, he invents all these new things and they're really exciting. So like snozcumbers and lickable wallpaper. And he always comes up with these ridiculous names for things. So in the book, there is an opportunity for that. In fact, Mrs. Lovely is a inventor. That's exciting. I liked that. Ooh. However, these are the things that she invents. Disco pants. They already exist. Surprise cake. A small cake that turns into a bigger cake. Popcorn grenade, which is just like a bomb of popcorn. Instant ball pit, that already. Not incredibly magical. Welly warmers, again, something that actually exists. Twinkle bombs, just a bomb of nice smelling stuff. Doesn't quite compare, does it? And the final one that really plays a big part in the book is Nice Pops, which is just a drink that makes you burp nice things at people, which is a funny concept, it's cool. But also Nice Pops, is that the best we could? Nice Pops? How long were you workshopping this for? I've even actually took exactly 90 seconds to come up with some alternatives for a creative drink that would make you burp nice things. How about Kind Cola, Cheerade, Jolly Juice, Better Beer, Happy Hops, or Glee Tea? I'm not even saying they're good ideas, but just the whole, like, I'm trying to use an example of, I think, what is the lack of imagination and why I was really confused. Like, why wasn't that a part of it? Why? Especially when it's so long. It's like, this book is 93 pages long and it introduces and creates a whole world for people. This book was 241 pages long, and not only did it not have to build the world because it was already built for it, but it really just felt like it dragged. And as somebody who is an attentive adult, I really had to make myself sit through it at parts. And I wonder if I was like a wriggly, impatient, rightfully creatively demanding child, if I would sit through this on my own. Like I said, there were parts of this book that I really liked. I liked that they kept some of the integrity of like the hallmarks of the book. So for example, the characters they were still there, and they really still sounded like themselves, apart from the really poor lack of insults. Like, lads, there's literally two of you. How are you letting this old man like run circles around you with insults? Like, there's so many insults out there. However, like, yeah, I like the fact they kept the characters and they sounded like themselves. There was a lot of the prank format throughout the book, and that's how it was structured, which felt very on theme, on brand. And then there is like the conclusion was, again, like I think the conclusion was quite funny because there's a false conclusion and then a real conclusion, which I did find good. I really enjoyed that part. And the conclusion isn't a redemption story, which is again something I was worried about. It's a trend in new books, and I don't always think that it's entertaining or imaginative. And this was much more of a old Roald Dahl ending, which is I'm going to call it the comeuppance ending. The Twits, yet again, most definitely got their comeuppance, which was delicious. Now, I was reflecting on how I felt about this book, and I really just want to state that I am not demanding reverence for the original work. Like I said, I think we should be allowed to play with it and be in dialogue with it. However, I think what I do demand is excellence. If you're going to rail over like a big literary legacy that other people really love and is like in the hearts and minds of a lot of people, you need to come at it with excellence. And like I said, Roald Dahl wrote this book in the last years of his life, and he was really freaking good by then. He worked really freaking hard at it, and it's kind of like, I'm not telling any author like, oh, you're not good enough to be Roald Dahl, but like, who is? I don't know if it should be attempted. And while I cannot stress enough how much I do not approve of his views, and I don't think that if there's any evidence of that in the books, they shouldn't be perpetuated and they should be rightfully tackled and explained, I don't think that is an excuse to give a child a worse book. And I do believe there are some incredible writers out there, and I do believe that we should invest in them and let them have the time and the space and the money, which is what Roald Dahl had, to be able to sit in your frickin' shed and practice your craft and try and get better at it. Any author that took on this project was going to be shown up by him, to be honest, when it comes to craft. And I don't know if it's an even fair task to ask any author to take on, let alone two, who haven't written loads of books. Like, some of the books they've written have been successful, and like I haven't read them, but they look great. They look like they're in a completely different genre or like in a completely different vibe, but they do look great. I'm sure they're wonderful, but I have to wonder, like, why didn't you ask somebody who is much more established at writing to do that? Like, why isn't this a task that was taken on by one of the like current alive and, to my knowledge, very nice and kind and have great views authors? And I have to come to the conclusion that either they wanted to save money or those authors said no. I don't know. But yeah, I think to me, we are, as readers, always asking, especially when you're a child, why? Why should I pick up this book? Why should this book be made? Why should I be the person to read it? And too often, I think that some commissioning editors, or maybe just like the publishers or the people that are controlling the publishers at the top, are saying, why not? Like, we own this IP, so why not? People will buy it, so why not? And we're just asking completely different questions. And when I look at a book like this, I just think, why? And I ended, even after I gave it a chance and I paid for it and I read it, I'm still thinking, why? I think what companies who are obsessed with owning the like historical IP, like intellectual property of dead authors, don't understand is that you can buy the characters and the concept, but you can't buy the writing. The writing is a skill. It's not something that you can just copy and paste and regenerate and have the same result. At the end of the day, characters and format are not what people fall in love with. They fall in love with the way a story is told. And for me, this book, while totally fine as just an average children's book that I would be happy for people to read, it did lack pacing, atmosphere, concision, and the general mischief that I was looking for in a book that has set a tone like being a sequel to The Twits. What is funny about the concept at the end of the book is there's a part where they drink the nice pop and the nasty people start saying nice things. And can you just like think about the irony of ventriloquizing the people in the book that are supposed to be mean and making them say nice things against their consent? And Roald Dahl had some really mean views, but he was also really clear about the fact that he didn't want any of his work changed like ever. So against his consent, you could say, this is being made, and we're almost like kind of ventriloquizing his skeleton and making him dance in a way that we'd like to. So he says the nice things so that we can keep selling the book to parents who want to buy nostalgic things for their kids rather than letting them have their generation's Roald Dahl, like somebody that they've discovered for the first time and they get to tell their parents about, and it feels like theirs, it feels contemporary, and the author is still around so they can meet them and they can wait for the next book to come out. I think those are really important things for children to have, as well as having some of the historical authors and classics and stuff around their house that have their own historical context and background to learn about. So while I'm sure that nobody asked for this opinion of mine, and perhaps nobody cares about it, this isn't the biggest thing that's going on right now in the world, let's be honest, I do think that it plays a part in a conversation we should have around what makes a good children's book, what makes a good children's author, and are we nurturing and investing in and looking and searching for the next Roald Dahl? Because if we hyper-focus on nostalgia marketing like this without putting in the proper prep and the proper effort, because I don't mean to be rude, but I don't feel like this book had an adequate amount of effort put into the writing, then we're cheating children out of really freaking good books. And if we wish for them not to read the original Roald Dahl, then we better have something better to put in their hands. Thank you so much for watching. I would like to leave some links below. I spoke on the Material Girls podcast a little bit more about the problematic stuff that Roald Dahl has said. So if you want to listen to that podcast and get a little bit more into that, where I'm talking to two people who are way more intelligent than me about it, then I'll leave the links to that below. We weren't interrupted by a sponsor during this video because of the Gumption Club. They tip me so I can keep making these videos for you, and in exchange I give them weekly podcasts, early access to videos, a fun Discord server, and loads more. So if you're interested in joining us, I'll leave links below to that. I have a book coming out, and I guess I should probably stop being rude about other people's writing because I'm definitely going to get roasted for how my book is. But I've got a book coming out called Half-Assed Human. It's coming out in the end of December, and if you'd like to pre-order it, I'll leave the links below. If you like this video, you might like some of these videos. Frog Snog out.